Welcome back for session 5.3. In this session, we're going to be covering all of our print media. If you've ever tried to print a website, you know how bad they can look. So we can create our own CSS that only applies when you go to print something. It'll make your printed pages look much better if you have any reason to print out your page, and we can adjust things around our printing. So let's get started. The first thing in print media is recognizing that you want to create your own print style sheet. That way, these styles only apply to print. Important things with printing: backgrounds, not always a good thing. If you have images for your backgrounds, if you have colors for your backgrounds, those may not be good, and a white background might be the best option, just because print generally looks better on a white background. When you have sections or articles and you want to have, or you might have page breaks in them, you want to be aware of what those page breaks are and how to avoid them being too awkward. With our navigation list, there's no reason for a navigation list on a printout. You can't click anything. So we generally hide every navigation list when you print it out because there's no reason for it to be there. And you want to make sure that your media and your header is set for your print or your screen or whatever it needs to be for this version. So you can say, only apply this CSS page if it's print. Only apply this CSS page if it's a screen. In this page, we're going to be working on our articles page. So our articles page is going to have some details that we want to be able to print out for our users. And so we want to make this page really pretty for printing. So we've obviously renamed our pages articles. We got rid of the TXT, and we're going to go ahead and add the style sheets to this page. As you can see, we applied the styles 3, which will be the one that we're working on for this page. This is what it looks like normally. So we're going to be making some changes to this so that it'll look really good on our mobile devices, but more importantly, it will look really good on our printing. So now that we have done that, we're going to go ahead and look at the print preview and just see what it would look like. So we've loaded the print preview. It's got the header, which is fine, except it's still got the navigation bar here. It's got these options over here, but obviously they don't click to anything. It breaks in the middle, like in the middle of a word on our accreditation here. We have our image here, which also breaks in the middle of our image. And it just doesn't look like it was designed well. So this is what we're going to be working on with this chapter, or with this session. So we're going to be accessing our print.css here, but let's make sure that we include the print.css in our articles page. So print.css. We're also going to be adding a couple of new things to this. We're going to be adding a media all to our reset because we want that one to go to all of our media. But our style 3, we really only want it to be for the screen. So we're going to set up our media 3 to be on the screen and our print to be for our print CSS. So that changes those around. When we come back over here and refresh, nothing should look different except when we go over to our print preview. This one should look a little different because it's, instead of using the styles 3, it's going to be using the print one. Now right now our print doesn't have any extra styles, but you'll notice that the aside didn't go to the aside here, and it just filled up the pages a little different because at this point we really don't have any CSS to be working with. That's what we're going to be changing right now. The way that we handle our print CSS is with our @page rule. So again, up in your page, in your CSS page, we can have an @page and we can give some details about the page. Included in here might be your page area. What size do you want it to be? What do you want your margins to be? Is it at 8.5 by 11, or do we want to have 1-inch margins? How are these going to work? So we can use those @ rules saying @page, and then we can say different margins, or different sides on one side or the other, or auto, so on and so forth. We can also use pseudo classes like first or last, left or right, these kind of things, and we can have different rules for which direction. Sometimes if you want to have your margin on any left-sided pages, so imagine being dual-sided pages, ones where the writing is on the left side, those want to have a different rule because they might want to have the footer in a different place, or they might want to have different sized margins. You can do that with your @ rules and your pseudo classes. You also can give them page names. So I can say, if I wanted to have a wide margin for this, that can be a page called wide margin, and then it can be applied for different elements. And we're going to see how this works when we look at some of the code. So let's go over to our print, and we are going to go ahead and hide the elements that we don't want. So first thing we want to do is our hidden objects. What don't we want? Well, first thing we don't want is our nav bar. Horizontal, because we really don't want that. We don't want any asides, because that whole aside section we don't need. And honestly, we really don't need the footer. So we are going to set those to display of none. Now remember, this is only going to be applied when you print. So when I refresh, it doesn't change anything. But now when I come over to the print, you'll see navigation bar is gone, the aside is gone, and the footer is gone, because none of those things are necessary when we print this out. At this point, we're going to set up our page so that the CSS knows what size page and what margins we want. So we're going to use our @page rule just for the whole page, and we're going to say that its size is going to be 8.5 inches by 11 inches. No, there's no X in there for the by, it's understood. And our margin is going to be 0.5 inches. Now this is the first time we've used inches in terms of CSS. We usually use pixels or percentages, but because this is a page, we're going to go ahead and set those as inches. The next thing we're going to do is go into the typography section. So you'll see that they gave us a little bit for our header here. In fact, let's go ahead and see how that looks on our print. We're going to go back and forth to print quite a lot in this one. So we've kind of gotten our margins really small here at the 0.5, and everything fills up nicely. We do have some problems with word wrapping and stuff, but we'll get through that. So now we're going to skip our header styles because it had our header styles, and we're going to go down into our typography. And in this section, we're going to be setting up our basic H1 and H2. Because we've used H1 and H2 throughout, we can go ahead and set those. So I'm going to go back setting the font sizes, the margins, and the line heights for my H1s, my H2, and my paragraph itself. The important thing to recognize with this is that we're using points, not pixels. That's because with print media, we use points. Okay, so now we've set our basic typography styles for our H1, H2, and H3. We've set our font sizes for those, and we added in a line height here in our H1 just to add a little bit of extra when we have an H1. If you're looking at the text here, you can see this is going to probably be your H1, and these are your H2s, and then of course these are our paragraphs. So we've added in some margins for all of those as well. When we refresh, again, never going to look different, we're going to go to our print, and you'll see that size came up pretty good. So that's a nice 28 with a little bit of an extra. It's got our basic paragraphs at 12 with our H2 with 20 points. And it just changed the size a little bit so that it's really nice to look at. That looks a lot better for our headers than it did before we added in those style sheets. The next thing that we're going to do in this section is we're going to do our list styles. So we have a couple of lists here. We have our accreditation here with our classroom management here, and some lists over here. We just want to set those lists so that they're all consistent. So we're going to add a UL. We're going to say our list style type is going to be a disk. Oops. Type is going to be a disk. And our margin on our left side is going to be 0.5. So that made those lists a little nicer. You can see how they've got those bullets, the disc, the way that we wanted, and they're all tabbed in instead of being that all the way over on the edge here. So that also makes it look a lot nicer. With our images, we want to make our images look nice. So we're going to play around with a little bit of image styles here just to add some nice borders and to make sure that their margins are set up and to kind of make those pictures really kind of stand out. So in our image styles, we are going to write article. So our images that are inside of an article, and image. Don't forget the second for the image part. If you just write article, nothing's going to happen. We're going to add a border. And this border is going to be 2 pixels solid with an RGB of 191. And that will allow us to add that little kind of grayish border. Our display is going to be block. We're going to add a margin of 0.25 inches and auto, so that the left and right will be auto and the top and bottom will be 0.25. And we're going to add a width to our images. We want to just add a solid 65% for our images, just so that when they show up, they fill up 65% of the page. There. Now we have this nice big image. It's got a nice little border around it. It's gray, so it's not black. Nice little gray border with a little bit of a margin at the top and the bottom. Left and right will auto, so that'll make it centered. So it's centered with this 65%. You can see the second image down here, same thing. It's got the border around it. It's got a little bit of a margin on the top and bottom, and then centered with that auto. So that was just kind of a nice way of making those pictures kind of stand out. The next part of this that we're going to do is our hypertext. So with our links, we have to make sure that the links don't look weird. If we print it in color, these are going to be in blue, and we don't want them in blue. So we're going to be changing around some of the things on our hyperlinks. First, we're going to set our hyperlinks to black. And we're going to do our text decoration of nothing so that they don't have that underline, because we don't want the underline. And we're going to do a little kind of cool thing with this one. We're going to add an after. And in this case, the after is going to be posting the actual link afterwards. So if someone prints this out, they can see what the actual hyperlink is after after the text. So we're going to add our content. And in this case, our content is going to be a quote. It's going to be a parenthesis. Then we're going to concatenate our attribute of our href. After our href, we're going to then be adding a second quote, parenthesis, space, quote, and that will be our content. We will add that as a font weight of bold, because we do want that to stand out. And we're going to say break word. So with word wrap, that means that they can break through, because remember, URLs are always going to be one line with no spaces. So we might have to break the word, and that's okay. We're going to let it do that. So if we refresh, we come back over to print. And I turn this on to color just so you can see color for the picture, but you notice that the hyperlinks do not have the blue and they're not underlined. See how it did this nice little thing where it put the URL after it? So that way, if someone wanted to get to this and they printed it out, obviously having the hyperlink there is useless, but putting in this text after with the actual link, that's really useful. And it did that for any of our hyperlinks that were in there. So you can see there were a couple down here in the promoting partnership. It went ahead and added those as well. So that's kind of a nice way of being able to do that. So you can have a hyperlink and still be able to see it when it gets printed, make it useful. Page breaks in printing is always important, and you want to make sure that you don't have page breaks in the middle of your code or in the middle of your text, because it's annoying and nobody likes that. So you can specifically set your page break before or page break after any of your elements. So you can say for your sections or your articles or any of your divs, I want to have page breaks before this, or I want to have page breaks after this. They won't apply the page break if it isn't necessary, but if it is, they will either apply the page break before or after if this section ends up in the middle of what would be printed. You can also prevent any page breaks by saying avoid. You can say avoid a page break, never put a page break in this element anywhere. So we can always also do that. There's also the concept of inside. The inside can be avoided, autoed, or inherited, and it simply means please prevent any page breaks from inside of the element. That's where that avoid comes in. If you've done Microsoft Word, you might understand the concept of widows and orphans. Widows and orphans are fragments of a section that exist either at the top or at the bottom of a page if that section is being split in the middle. But we can tell you, I don't want to have any widows. Widows are at the top, orphans are at the bottom. I don't want any widows of 1 line or 2 lines. Say my widows have to be at least 3 lines or more. So as long as you're going to have 2 or 3 3 or more lines, then you can go ahead and page break me. But if you can't page break and still end up with 3 lines, don't page break there. Page break at a different spot. Same with orphans. If you leave 1 or 2 or 3 lines at the bottom of the page and then have the rest of the section on the other side, just put the page break above. But if you're going to get the page break right in the middle of the section, that's okay. As long as you don't have those widows and orphans 1, 2, and 3 type items at the top or bottom. And you can set those to the number of lines allowed. So you would say widows, 3, or orphans, 3, saying that I don't want to have any orphans that are less than 3 lines. I don't want to have any widows that are less than 3 lines. So that's how those widows and orphans work. The default browser generally follows the subset of rules here. You want to avoid breaking inside page elements if they have a border. You want to avoid breaking inside of a table or a floating element. You want to break as few times as possible. So you do want to break so that you get, as few pages as possible. But you don't want to do them as few as possible. And any of the manual page breaks are going to happen when the browser comes through. So if we've decided where we wanted those page breaks, the browser will read those before it tries to do its default settings. With our articles, we really do want them to be printed on the next page. So we're going to be talking about page breaks here. In this case, we want to say every article after the first one should be on its own page. So we are going to say article, and we're going to use our pseudo type, nth of type. And our type, we're going to put an n plus 2. And it'll select every article after the second one. In this case, we're going to do our page break, and we're going to say before always. So anytime we have an article that's going to fall where that page break is, it'll always push it to the next line. So we have our accreditation, who provides the accreditation, and it pushed the R community to the next line because we wanted to make sure that that one went on its own. And that way we were able to get that in its own page because we really wanted that in its own section. Next, we're going to do some page break insides to avoid some page breaks. Obviously, we don't want page breaks in the middle of anything if we can avoid it. So if we are in the middle of an image or if we're in the middle of a list, so either an OL or a UL, we want a page break avoid. So page break inside, and we want to avoid those because we do not want any page breaks inside of our images like it did in that first one or inside any of our lists. We want to make sure our lists are complete on one page. The next one we want to deal with is our widows and orphans. Remember when we talked about widows and orphans, we wanted them to be not more than 2 or 3 lines on one side. So we're going to do that with our widows and orphans here with our page break styles. So underneath this one, we're going to go ahead and add for our paragraphs, orphans, and we're going to set those to 3. and our widows. And those are going to be 3 as well. That will save us from having extra lines on just one page, or having the widows or orphans up the top or the bottom. So let's look at how this page turned out. We have our accreditation here. How does our accreditation work? We didn't have any widows and orphans here. And then our community ended up on its own line. Everything's got its nice little URLs. We think that that looks much better for a printout than what we started with. So hopefully going through the tutorial, you have seen a lot of the things that we're going to do. In your review assignment for this chapter, you are going to be adding a parenting tips to your trusted friend's daycare. No, you do not have to do the tutorial to turn it in. I just want the parenting tips pages anyway. For this project, make sure that you test it against all of the options, the mobiles, the tablets, the desktops, large screen, small screen, printing, all of the different things that we have talked about, because you're going to be changing all of those things as we go along. Test your code. Make sure it looks right. Ask for help. It might be a simple 5-minute fix, and it can save you banging your head against the wall for an hour if you ask for help. Can't guarantee you I'm going to respond immediately, but I should respond within 24 hours, and hopefully sooner if it's during the week. Weekends, not as much so. So try to get started early. Get your questions asked before Friday night, Saturday morning, because I may not be available on Saturday and Sunday to help you. If you are still working on your site, you can zip the folder and submit it. Otherwise, go ahead and post it to your site. Our Case 1 project is going to be the Golden Pulps comic book site. So this is going to, again, follow a subset of rules. Please remember to read the rules and the requirements as you go through it. They should look similar to the example that's here. Check both against your desktop and your mobile versions, and again, ask for your help. When you're finished, either post it to your site or submit the zip file to. And finally, the case for this chapter. This is the Jersey Buoys, or Buoys, depending on how you want to pronounce it. It's a surfing school website. So it's a school, they do surfing, should be fun. They gave you the graphics and the text to populate. You should have all of this knowledge in your head on how to make your site. Read the requirements. Make sure that you check off the required aspects, but I'm starting to really look for your creativity on this. I'm looking for your personality. So yes, you have to check off the list to make sure you do everything required, but I want you to have some fun, and I want you to start making these your own. Really important, when you start these projects, you need to sketch out what do you want it to look like before you start. If you're going to have to decide if you want an aside, or if you want an article, if you want a main, if you want a div, how you want your menu bar to be, where do you want the footer, how do you want all these things to go, sketching it out on a piece of paper will help you. Before you even start, you should be sketching everything out. Make sure you ask for help if you need it. Don't be afraid to look back at your previous chapters, the projects you've already done. You can copy some of those concepts, and that's okay. That's how we learn. Do it over and over again until you feel comfortable making your own site. When you're finished, either post it to your site or submit it to your zipped folder. This is starting to get into the projects that you can really use in your portfolio to show off your skills. Because at this point, you are not following a checklist. Everybody's site will be different. This is what you think looks good and works well for what you're doing. Have a great week, and I will talk to you soon.